Hey, welcome to everyone who's here today. Right, so what we're doing, let me just click a few things here. So what we're hoping to do today, we have a few people coming in and hopefully we'll have more, is really we're just having a chat about traditional brewing in Africa, which is something I have no clue about whatsoever. So hopefully people here will have a lot more and be able to kind of educate us. First of all, if you're watching this, I'm streaming this. We're doing this in conjunction with the Chicago Brewseum. So if you're watching this on their page, we'll try and monitor that for questions. But really, if you can come over to the beerfest.com page and come in here, it's probably more likely you'll get noticed. So just check that. The link's on the top of the post. So I have with us, we have Apiwe Nxusani. I'm not sure, actually, I should have checked with you how you pronounce your surname. Bio.
Yeah.
Okay, I should have checked that first. My apologies. So Bio's with Bature in Nigeria. That's, I think, one of the main craft breweries in Nigeria, is it?
Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, and if I'm right, you have an interest in traditional brewing, but you have also studied in Scotland.
I studied in Scotland, yes.
So
I have the interest in the traditional ones. Yes, you're right.
And we also have Jessie Flynn here, who's actually from Boston originally. Somehow or other went to Rwanda for a project and kind of never left. Instead, she's co-founded the first craft brewery in Rwanda. So an interesting couple, and we're hoping we'll be joined by Apiwe in a while from Tolokazi in South Africa. She seemed to be having some sort of technical difficulties, but we're hoping she'll be able to join us in a little while. So the idea is we're just going to have a discussion. We're going to just kind of talk about the beers. We're not doing it as a presentation. So anybody who has questions, comments can kind of come in and do that. And before we start, I guess we should point out it's a big topic. It's a big topic, big geography. So we're not going to kind of get into every single tradition and culture throughout the whole continent. We're actually not even focusing on North Africa. We're going to be kind of further south, and hopefully with the three areas like Rwanda, Nigeria, and South Africa, we'll get a good snapshot of what the traditions around each place are. And I guess the other thing to point out is that we're also talking about time, and cultures change and traditions change over time. So what's considered traditional now might not have been what was traditional 20 years ago or 100 years ago, 500 years ago. So we're going to be maybe teasing out some of how that changed, as well as, kind of trade routes, politics, and all of that came into play. And then the only other thing to point out is that I have no clue about any of this. My only knowledge of traditional brewing is what I've read from Lars Marius Garshol and the work he's done on farmhouse brewing in Nordic countries and in the Baltics, which is pretty far removed. So pretty much that's my frame of reference, and most of my questions, any of my ideas will be kind of coming from trying to work out the similarities and the differences between those, how that worked out. So so I think that's pretty much our set for today. We're going to keep an eye out here for Apiwe, and hopefully she will join us soon. But maybe if one of you start off, so I wonder where brewing fitted into Africa. I presume it had the same kind of ceremonial and bonding role that it has in most other places, that it's for bringing people together, weddings, funerals, community events, things like that. That be accurate, Bayo?
Yes. So that's usually what beer has been in Nigeria and Ghana, which I've read about the Ghana one, but I know, of course, more about the Nigerian one. It's been more for events, weddings, and funerals. I have personally witnessed the drinking of the local traditional beer at funerals. I haven't actually seen it at weddings, maybe because with the influx of the commercial breweries, people have the access to these other ones and find it sort of like the more prestigious thing. So that's used more for weddings, but it's still part of the culture that at funerals, for example, you drink the traditional beer. In Nigeria, you have more of it's made from sorghum, millet, and sometimes a flour from cassava called gari, which is a very popular not a beverage, a very popular meal here called gari. So those are the kind of beers you find. Burukutu, it's called in Nigeria. Pito, it's called in Ghana. Very similar. Usually, you find them, as said, at events, funerals, more than weddings nowadays. But then it's also a drink that is made in very many places. You just find people who make them in front of their houses, and you just need to be passing by and you just join them in drinking it. The commercial ones, in the sense that it's sold, but all in small volumes nowadays.
Right. Yeah. So actually, that was one of my questions. Like, who actually was brewing? Kind of traditionally, was it? Was it brewed as low individuals, or is it like a village brewery, or who?
So it usually was a kind of an individual thing. You find wives brewing it for their families, and sort of extended families. Up till now, you don't find men really into making of these local beers. So it's not a thing that has really changed over time, where men or women used to make it, and now you find the other gender making it. It's really been women who make it up till date. I mean, I still was at a place this year, so it has to be within the last 2 months in any case, where I went to meet those who make these local beers, and it's still the women making it. So it's always been the women making it for very small communities, either their extended families or just a group of families that live around this place. So even now, you find it in small communities still, but it's the women who make it for maybe 50, 60 households. It's never something you make in a place and sell like 10, 50 miles away. It's usually just people who drink it around where it's been made, but it's still the women who make it.
Right, Jesse's nodding there, so I'm guessing it's the same up around Rwanda. That it's the same basic scene, I guess.
Yeah, same thing in terms of women make the beer, and it's same thing. Sorghum is the primary ingredient to brew with. And also there's banana wine here. So there's also a kind of strong banana beer, banana wine, which one it is a fine line. And women make it, and it's for weddings, for funerals. But then also women in the villages just like make it to sell, and so people can come by their house at any point, when they have a batch ready, and, people sit around and have a drink. It used to be very communal in Rwanda. It was a calabash that the beer is served in, and then everybody has a straw, so there can be like 8 or 10 straws coming out of it, and everybody around that same calabash and drinks the same beer at the same time. That has changed. People now take their own cup, and especially with COVID, there's no sharing of straws and beverages. But yeah, same thing. Women are the brewers here, and I think also just thinking about the history of beer going way back. Beer originated in Mesopotamia and Egypt. We think of beer a lot of times, especially in like the craft beer world these days, as like it's a German thing, or it's something like. But it's not. It was traditionally African women who brewed beer as the very origin story of beer. So we have African women to thank for the beer that we know today, and the evolution of that. And way back it was, instead of malting, because this is early agriculture, it was chewing of different grains, and the enzymes in the saliva would actually do what the malting process today does, or the enzymes that we add, and that has evolved over time to be the whole malting process, and the brewing that we know these days. But yeah, in a lot of ways it's very similar.
Right.
About it's at home and it's done by women.
Right. Actually, something there I had you just mentioned and kind of occurred to me. In like, if you look at Europe, there's very definite line between wine drinking and beer drinking. And basically what I stick to and what I'll describe is that kind of further south it was just fermented by itself. So they got lazy. They didn't, it's a lot less work than making beer. Is there any sort of split along that down African lines? Because I would imagine closer to the equator, you've got an awful lot more fruit that'll just ferment by itself rather than, say, further south. Is there any?
Bio, you want to take on?
Yeah. So we don't have that much of it. I don't know if it's probably due to the abundance of grains. So there are not so many fruits, beers or wines in Nigeria. You find 2 or 3 main classes. The local beers, the local spirits called ogogoro. closest spirit I could tell to that would be gin. So even in Nigeria, it's called local gin. But people also know the name ogogoro. That's what it's called. And lastly, the palm wine. Palm wine is from the palm fruit. It really has nothing to do other than you just tap it and put it in the bottle. Then you get fermentation in a day, and in 3 days, it's the alcohol content increases. But not so much of fruit wines. I cannot tell, but I don't think I've heard about any banana wine in Nigeria, for example. And there's lots of bananas and oranges, But there is lots of burukutu, as I said, which is the ones made from sorghum, millet, and some cassava nowadays. So in research about this, for example, I found that in a clear difference between burukutu and pito, which are both made in Nigeria and Ghana, is that in both countries, burukutu usually could have an adjunct. I know ideally sorghum, millet will be called adjuncts, but because they're the primary malts here, let's take them as a base malt. But you find where people could add cassava flour, which is called gari in Nigeria, and probably in Ghana as well. People could add cassava flour to burukutu. So when you have burukutu, usually you have more than one grain, but in pito you find it primarily as millet, few times as sorghum. So you find one as the one with the adjunct, the other without the adjunct. Ogogoro, as I said, is usually gotten from palm trees as well. So you get the palm wine, then you distill the palm wine. And I also find that more men do ogogoro either because of the stronger alcohol content, or also because of the actual process of tapping the palm wine, which requires climbing the tree. Up till now, you don't find any mechanized way of actually going up the tree to get the palm sap. So you still find men usually doing the ogogoro, and finding them doing the palm wine and the ogogoro. The ogogoro is the distillation of the palm wine, and women doing more of the burukutu and pito. That's what you find usually in Nigeria, maybe Benin Republic and Ghana as well. Yeah.
Okay, so, but it's all still very much grain based. It's not like
grain based. Yes, all grain based. Yes.
Right, so the fruit is just like I said, it's an adjunct. I just wondered because, like I said, if you look at Europe, it is such a clear line where they just no beer, no wine. It's I'm kind of amazed that there isn't some sort of a split in Africa, but.
We do have like in Rwanda, there's people that do banana beer, banana wine, and it kind of, when you ask, is it beer, is it wine? People are like, it's the same thing. And it's ripe bananas that then you have to use a specific kind of grass. So the bananas are harvested and usually put in a canoe type kind of empty thing that has a drain at one end. And then there's a certain grass that's harvested, and the grass is pushed into the bananas as a way to. When I'm told about how it works, that it's about, it's to help mash it. But other people said there's probably a yeast because it's a very specific kind of grass that has to be used. So we're actually working with some Rwandan institutions right now to do some research to see, is the yeast in the grass, is that why that grass needs to be used in order to start that fermentation process. And then depending on how long it's fermented, under the conditions, the ripeness of the bananas, you get kind of stronger or weaker banana wine. And then sometimes that is added into like you mentioned, like using it as an adjunct. Sometimes it can be mixed into different things. And then also, like, not in Rwanda, so I can't speak from kind of personal experience of seeing this or really hearing much about it, but thinking of honey is used a lot here as an adjunct in the sorghum beer. So ichigaje is the traditional sorghum beer, and they'll add honey to that. So it's not a fruit, but it's a honey additive. And then there's in Kenya, they'll do a beer that has sausage fruit, like the Kigelia africana. There's a certain kind of long bean pod that comes off the tree that's used to brew a sorghum-based beer, but that adds a flavor and a yeast, and then honey will be added to that. And then if we look, going up to Ethiopia, we end up with tej and using honey wine. So there's a kind of a transition, I think, of, in some places what grains and what fruits and different things are used.
Yeah. Okay. I just see, I think Apiwe is just joining us.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you, which is pretty good.
It's a good start. I think that's the best I can do. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So we'll leave you there. If you can get the camera going, do. We were just, so I'll just introduce Apiwe is the owner of Tolokazi. She's the first Black female-owned brewery. She's herself has also been, let me check my notes, the chair of the Institute for Brewing and Distilling in South Africa and the Beer Association of South Africa, and has huge knowledge on traditional brewing as well. So we're delighted to have you. So we were just talking, just really getting started there, Apiwe, about where brewing fit in as a part of the culture, and that it was very communal, but that there didn't seem to be any kind of, across Africa, that we saw any kind of split between wine country and brewing country. Like it's all very much brewing. Is that the same down South Africa? There's no, like, what was the tradition who brewed and where it fitted in? Was it all for communal events?
Sorry. I can't be late. I'm
Okay, we're having someone dying live on stream here.
Please excuse me.
We'll be famous, not for good reasons, but we'll be famous.
Yeah. So I think. Oh, sorry for being late. First, I think I just had the problem with logging in. Sorry. So yeah, in South Africa, brewing has always been communal. Is, I think, as you say. Sorry, can I be excused?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, just come back. So if you were brewing for an event, I presume these beers, they weren't kept, like they were drunk within kind of a day or two of being ready. They'd be fermented quickly and drank quickly.
Yes, here they are low alcohol based. I haven't actually checked the alcohol content, but from just drinking it, you could tell probably 2 to 3% thereabouts. Okay. Real low alcohol based. Should be like, it's of course session, so easy to drink. But what is also interesting is that there's almost always a batch that is left behind to really ferment well, and that becomes a very strong one. So what people will tell you, for example, is there is this woman where I drink a strong burkutu from. She does hers differently. But what she's really doing differently is taking a batch outside and leaving that to ferment stronger. There is no clear yeast used here, really. It's wild yeast and lactobacillus, really. So you leave it exposed always for 24 to 48 hours, they'll say, for you to get the regular kind of fermentation where you have the froth on top and it gets 2 to 3% alcohol. But when someone leaves another batch of this behind for another, let's say 4 or 5 days, then get stronger alcohol. So people tell you this. There's this woman down my street who does the regular one. Then there's this woman in 3 streets away from me who does a very strong one. But really, what's the strong one is you've just left it to really ferment to become maybe 5-6% alcohol, But it's open fermentation, left for wild yeast and lactobacillus. You can almost always taste the lactic acid fermentation. It's almost always there. Some sort of kind of the acidic aftertaste. You can always tell that. So that's where it's coming from.
Right. So essentially, they're kind of, I suppose, lambics, like what they'd have in Belgium as lambics.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, that's interesting. So their sour beers would be.
Yeah. So if you usually have it in the first day or second, it's very hard to pick the sourness. You can almost taste just the malt sweetness, and people tell you they take it because it's good for them to sleep. It's good for them to manage their mood, for example. But then I can almost tell, it's the first 2 days of fermentation. You have some kind of lactic acid fermentation, of course, just starting. So it also has something similar to the probiotic thing, they tell you it's good for my digestion, it's good for my back pain, it's good for my mood, So I can almost tell that that's the reason you're just getting, same thing we're probably taking Greek yogurt at this point in time, But then the other person who says, I take the one from the other woman in 5 days time, says, this is really for the strong alcohol content. And the person doesn't at this point mention the same advantages, or doesn't say think like it's good for my mood or for my digestion. No, it's now really I'm drinking it because it's kind of a social thing, and it's more alcohol in it. But 90% of it thereabouts will be those who take it in the first few days when it's still real low alcohol, and it's easy to tell that you could just be getting all the probiotic properties from from this.
Okay, so yeah, because I mean, I think of wild, spontaneous fermented, and you think of very sour, and they have to be blended together to kind of take some of that sourness away. You blend the kind of the new and the old and all of that. That's the craft, but that's
Yeah,
interesting.
that almost always happens as well, because because of the kind of not really batch fermentation, because it's also batch mashing they do here. So there's almost always like 3 different batches are available at every point in time. So there's one still being cooked. There's one just undergoing fermentation. There's another one that was made 3 days ago. So there's always some kind of mixture here. So when you speak with the women, usually they don't know about yeast. They don't know about the source of the fermentation. They don't know about why the one left for 5 days. Some of them even don't have the ones left behind for 5 days. They only have the one they sell in 2 days, for example. But you can tell the fact that you took the leftover from the one that was done 6 days ago. You mixed it with the one you made today, so you're easily transferring yeast from one to the other. So you cool this down. You take the yeast from the old one, you blend with this one, and that turns to the one you're selling in 2 days' time. But of course, because of the malt sweetness from the one you just made yesterday, the sourness isn't going to be pronounced, because it's still just a very small batch of it that has the yeast and the bacteria and everything. So it's only the very strong ones that you get to get that sourness. Usually the first 2 days, it's really malt sweetness you get from it.
Okay, is that the same for you, Apiwe? Is that what you see as well? That it's the same style of beers, that they have a couple of batches going at the same time, or is it different down in South Africa?
Yeah, I mean, when okay, sorry for being late, but I'm assuming we're talking about the traditional side, like the historic. Yeah. Okay, so in South Africa, I think it's the same throughout the continent. I think it's like we brew in the ceremonies. I mean, that's kind of like why people brew, whether there's a new baby in the family, there's just been a death, there's been somebody's getting married. So we'd always brew as part of any ceremony that involves ancestors. So the beer is actually linked as one of the things that are used when we communicate with the ancestors. Obviously, it also is there to entertain the people that will be coming to your ceremony to actually celebrate with you. So it is done by women. So I am wearing my doek just as a sign of respect, because in our culture, women are the only ones who brew beer. And if you are married, you have to wear one of these. It's a sign of respect to the ancestors, to the family. Like when we brew, whether you are married or not, you always have to wear a long skirt. So even if, let's say, I get home wearing a pair of jeans, it's like you have to kind of quickly get something to wrap around yourself. I'm sure it's the same in Nigeria. I'm positive of. You cannot touch the brew, be around the brew if you are not wearing a skirt, and that is just a form of respect. And I mean, it's one of those things, if you don't do them, you don't want to test it. You don't want to test what the ancestors are going to do. You like that's how it's supposed to be done. That's how it's done. And also with the brewing itself. So personally, I was never into traditional brewing, and I think it's the same as any other young women, and it's a problem we have. I think we'll talk about it maybe tomorrow also. That the tradition is dying. So like my generation and younger, nobody cares. We don't care about brewing anymore. We're all moving to the cities. So you find that it's the old women, the grandmothers who are left in the villages, who are now they're the last generation that is able to brew these beers the traditional way, because the process does take about a week. So if I'm working, like now I'm based in Johannesburg, I'm from the rural Eastern Cape. So if I have to travel home, which is going to take me to drive, will take me a full day to drive if I was to go home now, and I'm working. So which means I'm probably, if there's a ceremony happening on a Saturday, I'll probably arrive Friday night, and the ceremony is happening on the Saturday morning, which means I've lost the full week of brewing. And therefore that tradition that's how we're losing it. We just cannot be. We're working, we're busy, and it's something for me personally. I feel as Africans we need to find a way of looking how do we, as we get modernized, as we are busy working and living in the cities, how do we still keep in touch with who we are and not lose that tradition? Yeah.
Yeah, so does actually that's raises a point there, because I mentioned before you came on that my only knowledge of kind of traditional brewing is what I've read by Lars Marius Garshol, and he's kind of documented farmhouse brewing in Nordic countries and the Baltics. And one of the things he kind of highlighted on it and talking to some people there is that they especially Lithuania and kind of parts of Norway, they have very traditional brewing on the farms, but it's dying out because people are seeing it as old fashioned, and they're just not, it's not even time, it's just that they see it as old, whereas they want to be modern. It's the same you're seeing there, is it? Or is it mainly the time based that you mentioned?
Yeah, very, very much. Yeah. So even I know, like in South Africa specifically, even the beers, the sorghum beers that are commercially available, they're losing market share to clear beer producers, where people are seeing like your cloudy traditional sorghum beer as being like you old school, old fashioned. You're traditional. You are too traditional. You're too rural. Those are the words they use. And that clear beer is like the future. When you drink from a glass bottle, it means you've made it in life. You're no longer rural. And obviously the big companies that are making beers in glass bottles are capitalizing on that and making products that are a cheaper version, so that to steal the market share from those guys. So what they're finding is that their market is actually, the young ones are not into sorghum beer.
Right.
So how do you find it difficult to keep them interested? And that is just for leisure drinking, not even when you have to. So what you find is that even when we have traditions or ceremonies, people just will have a sip because it's kind of, you have to, but they will not sit and drink like from the calabash, like maybe like finish the whole thing. They will be like, I kind of have to because by tradition or by law, I kind of have to put my lips on this and have a sip, and that way my ancestors are happy. But they will not go beyond that. Then they will then move on to drink clear beer.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
not sure if you guys are finding the same thing in Rwanda, Nigeria. Speaking, I'm sure it will probably be like a West Africa thing, probably similar.
Yes, it's similar here. I didn't drink any traditional beer until maybe 3 years ago. I knew about it, I'd seen it being made just once, but until I made it a deliberate thing to find out about how it's made, where it's made, who are those making it, and who are those drinking it, I didn't have enough information about it. However, after finding out about those making it, when I ask around, you find out there's so many other people have actually had these beers and maybe even regularly have it. So it's not so commercial that you'll find it everywhere. Not as commercial as, of course, the big breweries or even Bature just starting up. Sorry, but then you only need to ask, and you find out that some people are really interested in this. It could be a case where in Lagos, Nigeria, there's a population of maybe 25 million, so there's a higher chance that I'll meet somebody who's drank any of this before. Maybe that, but I think it's also something that so long as the tradition is still alive, but definitely dying. So long as it's still alive, it means those in the local community where it's still being made have definitely had it before. I didn't grow up in any of those areas, and it had to be a deliberate option for me to go find out about this. But then you find out when you get there that lots of people still know about this. Lots of people are still practicing it. But definitely, Apiwe, as you said, yes, there could be many, but less than it was last year, less than it was 20 years ago, less than it was 50 years ago. It's definitely dying. I have taken interest in it. I have drank it a number of times, done some of my own research into it, exchanged information about it with Kevin, Bature's co-founder, and we have that interest to keep it alive. I know that there is a lot that has been lost, but then with the experience that we have now as industrial brewers, using all the technology now, then there is a lot you could do. It was only when I checked into it that I found out that none of the people who make it right now know about yeast, but they find out that there is fermentation going on. They don't know about fermentation, but they know about the difference that happens from the final day when it was produced to 2 days after. None of the people I met, for example, know about chewing, but they know, yes, they used to chew this before, and then you find some fermentation going on. However, in Nigeria, in Lagos, Nigeria, I have found women who actually do malting. So they get raw millet. I haven't seen it with sorghum, raw millet, and they do the actual steeping, drying. They don't kill it, but they leave it out to actually sprout before they use it. So they're actually using sorghum malt, or rather millet malt here, but they don't know anything about the malting process. They just know this is the way we make it. So if I know about the malting process, I know, for example, that it's definitely wild yeast and some lactic acid bacteria here. So I have the option of also replicating this in kind of an industrial scale. Of course, it will start with something very small. When we spoke about it in Bature, we said something about like 100 liters, and let's see how this goes. Do 100 liters of brew to almost as traditional as possible. Find out how it comes. We have a mandate in Bature to use a local ingredient in every beer. So we have sorghum in all our beers. It's almost a law in Nigeria. I think there are only 3 commercial beers that don't have any sorghum. So almost every Nigerian beer has sorghum in it. But we probably have a higher amount where we have at least 30% of our grain bill always as sorghum. But we now have the option of also using millet and cassava. There is a huge amount of cassava. Cassava, of course, has its own problem, having some amount of cyanide and all that. But there's no reason why we won't use millet. There's no reason why we won't put the knowledge we have from commercial and technical brewing into these old traditions. It's dying, but yes, I'm alive to keep it alive.
I think sorry, just to come to the also, I think for me, coming, like I said earlier on, I was actually not into traditional brewing. It's one of those things you'd see, like the old people do it. You like, whatever, do what you must. I'm just doing me. But when I became a brewer, when I started working for SAP, trained as a brewer, did the diploma in brewing, and I remember, because then my dad was like, I needed to go back home and actually do like a Thanksgiving ceremony where you do the whole, invite the whole village and obviously thank the ancestors and those alive for the blessings and everything else, just kind of keep shining your life. So before that, I was forced to go home because it was my ceremony. It was my thing. And this was like back in it was like 2000, and when I just started SAB, I'm like giving away my age now, 2008. And for me, that was the first time I realized actually I should be knowing this. I've just completed a diploma in brewing and I call myself a brewer, but I have no clue what is happening here at back home. And as I sit with my mother and my aunt, telling me do this, do that, because for them it's passed on. You get told this is what you do. Why you do it, no one knows. They just know it has to be done that way. And I was sitting there and I was explaining every small process scientifically that actually we studied this. Now you're doing this. So, for example, measuring, they would fill the water, for example, and it comes to experience, when it's hot or when it's just the right temperature. They would talk about your water, you boil water. So everything that you touch that you're going to use for the brew, you first have to wash off with boiled water. And obviously that's where sterilization comes in, that you cannot brew without sterilizing. They tell you that if you do not use boiled water and you just use lukewarm water, your brew will be off, So what I found very interesting is that every single step that takes place it's explainable in scientifically, which is that the traditionally it hasn't been explained scientifically, except it's explained the way that it's explained.
Yeah, no, that matches up again what I said about my own knowledge on kind of the farmhouse thing up north, and it came down to the same thing that they were saying, like, everybody follows the steps, nobody knows why, but it would be a simple thing like when they're lautering the wort, it would be like it would have to be a certain flow, a certain thickness coming out, and nobody could explain why. And it turned out that if you didn't do it, the pipes got blocked because they were using juniper twigs to kind of filter and things like that. And nobody knows why, but everybody just does it, and everybody maybe has something slightly different, but then they brew their own beer. Actually, that's something I'm gonna. When you mentioned it, you kind of hinted at it there, that some people will be known for stronger beer or for weaker beer or for whatever. Does every individual have their own kind of maybe slight take on it that they'd be known for, that they'd be known as, their beer is good for this, or is good for a party, or is good for, that they're known for good beer or bad beer? And is it kind of shameful if you're known as a bad beer?
Well, yeah. Well, I think that'll be shameful if you get Burukutu or Pito wrong. I don't know anybody being known for bad ones, but what I definitely know is people being known for good ones. So when I went to meet the first person I saw making Burukutu, I was referred to that particular person as somebody who made good Burukutu. So it means people are known for making good ones. Maybe some others are known for making bad ones, but definitely people are known for making good ones. But it's interesting that people who make even the good ones don't really know so much about what they are doing, but they're getting it right. Just as Apiwe said, for example, they know about the water temperatures, even though they are not measuring the temperature, but I heard the woman say, it's too hot, so just basically knows not to use water at maybe 80 degrees, for example, because she's got enzymes in her malt, but she doesn't know she's got active enzymes because the last stage of what she did was the sprouting, and she doesn't know that, but she knows. So, for example, so there's no lautering phase, but after the mash, they sort of sieve everything. Was in like a 200 kilogram drum, similar to the drums I get for sorghum syrup here. Sieve, trying to get out only the wort into another drum, and then wait a while. What's basically is happening is you have another sediment again, and take away the clear water again into another drum until you have a very clear water. It's same thing I do in the brewery here when I'm trying to do my own lautering. I recirculate for a while, do some valve off before I transfer to the kettle. But she doesn't know what she's doing. She only knows she needs a very clear water before she starts boiling. So there is a lot of information they have and not really understanding that they have this much information. What they just know at the end of the day is the beer turns out right when I do it this particular way. And there are a few people who want it, yes, good, but maybe stronger. Then I leave it kind of a 50 liter behind for them, but they have to come in 3 days' time and it's stronger, But they don't know that the reason why it has to be exposed is because you need more wild yeast to ferment these. You need the lactic acid bacteria to work and all that, So they know what they are doing, but they don't know why they are doing what they are doing. Yeah,
right.
That's it.
Yeah, that makes.
I would like to ask a question of Bio and Apiwe. So here in Rwanda, when we make sorghum beer, it's called the yeast, but it's prepared before the sorghum beer is made of a mixture of malted sorghum flour with bitter leaf, and it's mixed with a certain plant that has a kind of an antibacterial latex as part of it. Then that is boiled down in a clay pot until it's a hardened substance that then later on is removed. And so when the sorghum beer is brewed, on the day for the event or the day before the event, they'll take a cupful of that pre-made yeast and put it in. And the question has been whether that's a kind of a substrate that attracts particular wild yeasts, or whether that itself has a yeast, like maybe this is like, the Rwandan version of a Kvik yeast of some sort. And I'm just wondering if you all have completely wild fermentation, or if there's a substrate or something that is also put in when there's traditional brewing happening.
So from what I've seen, traditionally, back in the days when we used to have like huts, you'll have like in a family, they'll have different huts. So the one hut would be for the kids, the one with the kitchen. So they usually used to have one that was dedicated for the beer making. So that would be a place where whenever there's beer being made, it will be brewed in that room. And obviously, we use our modern knowledge and modern proper understanding. I would then assume that in that space, you had the wild culture. It was trapped in that room. And because over the years, the tradition is passed on to, like, from the grandmother to the daughter and an aunt. So that culture of yeast would be what belongs to that family, and then that's how they were able to consistently make the same beers, good beers. We were saying earlier that there are brewers who are known in the village for being good brewers. Like they know that so and so's beer, no matter what happens, it always come right because you always have that. And I think to what you're asking, Jesse, there probably is a culture. Like I know there's a few universities here in South Africa who are actually now doing some research work trying to identify these yeast strains. Because I mean, when we do beer, we buy from fermenters or Lalaman or some of these guys who have obviously over the years isolated and have a pure strain. And back in the days, those yeast were not there, but people were making good beers, and not just beer, also distilling and doing all sorts of other fermented beverages. Which means that in Africa we have our own strains of yeast that are indigenous to us, that are sitting, that are not yet discovered. That might be the same family as all the other yeast that we know of, or might not be. And I know there's like 2 universities at the moment that are doing work in that space, and I think it's up to our generation, the generation that's coming, to use the knowledge that we have to not to question, because I think what I found is with like my grandmother, like when I started questioning a lot, she'd be like, "You don't question tradition." I'm like, "I'm not questioning, how you guys have been doing it. I'm not saying it was wrong. I just need to understand it, and it needs to be documented, because this information it's not information that you easily come around. And I think it's up to those of us now to say, how do we take what has been happening in the past and document it? And I mean, if you look at the malting, they used to, I mean, back in the days, they would after farming, whether it was maize or sorghum, they would put it in this grass made thing, hooven thing. They would soak it in rivers, and they knew that in the river, you don't put it in the fast running water stream. You put it on the side, you leave it there for a day or two, depending on where you harvest your sorghum. Then from there, you leave it out to dry and open. They put it on grass mats, and they know you never allow birds to come there. You don't want insects to go, and they would let it dry and germinate, and then from there they would dry it.
Yeah. So, can I just jump back a little step here, just because something jumped into my head? So, I mean, what you've mentioned, Bio, and what Apiwe mentioned there was about the yeast, and that would be kind of each person would have their own yeast just by default, by being kind of keeping it in a room or whatever, and that would keep yeast. Was there? I guess there's 2 questions. One was stuff fermented in barrels at all, like, because that would contain yeast as well, or how was it all open? I'm just wondering how, like, where else the yeast might be kind of preserved.
Yeah, so it's mainly open calabash. Calabash is earthenware pots. I think that's the more appropriate term here, not necessarily just calabash. Earthenware pots. And there's really no sterilization. Could be, of course, some cleaning, and maybe just try to sanitize using basically cleaning, but no sterilization. So there is definitely the keeping of cultures of yeast from one generation to another. And yes, it's done in the same place. So if you've got the wild yeast, there are some cultures of yeast over, definitely over years, that's the same culture of yeast you are using there. It could also tell why you could have different flavors of these beers from different places, because now you've cultured the yeast, and this is the primary thing that ferments your beer. In a different community entirely, that's what they have as their own yeast, So there's the fact that you use the same tools, the same pots. You don't necessarily sterilize. You just do some form of cleaning. So you are keeping your yeast from one generation to the other. But as I also said, what I've also found is the mixing of leftover from one particular batch to another, so you've got the strong fermenting one, you mix that with the freshly fermenting one. So you're basically just transferring this active yeast to this new one again. And then when this one gets empty again, you do your cleaning, which is not really sterilization. So the yeast is being recycled one way or the other. And unfortunately, there is still a culture of secrecy where people, even those who have a little information, don't want to divulge the information that they have, So there is a culture of this is the way we do it. So even when you know what you do and you know that it has to be this particular pot, you don't actually tell them it's because this is the pot that could ferment it. I tried a separate pot once and it didn't work, so I had to go back to my old pot, But you just keep that information to yourself and just tell the generation coming after you, make sure you use this particular pot for your fermentation, but you don't tell them why. So they'll link it with something about maybe something ancestral. It's this is the pot the ancestors used, but really it's not just that. Yeah, it could be the pot the ancestors used, but the reason is because you've got a very good culture of wild yeast in this particular pot, and this is why we have to ferment in this particular pot.
Yeah, and you throw out the ones, the pots that made the bad beer, you throw because they were bad.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that was interesting because that's the same. I mean, it's the same thing about all yeast management, I guess. They're doing. So, maybe just before I move away from yeast here, if anyone minds, presumably like traditions have changed, like you said. I mean, it's all. Everything changes. Is there any change to that kind of tradition, like that people brew? No, I suppose in your case it's not. I'm sorry, I'm thinking out loud here before I have my thought formed. I was wondering, like, again, coming back to my little knowledge, being farmhouse brewing up in the Nordic countries, that they would have their own yeast, but now a lot of them have switched to kind of commercial yeast, but they're doing everything else traditionally. But I suppose that's not the case there with yeast. Would there be other kind of things? I suppose one is like hops. What do people use hops now, or what kind of ingredients in addition to sorghum and that?
So this side, because we don't have, there's very few people that still do continuous brewing, so where you're able to keep a culture from the previous batch and use it. So what you find now is normally people start from like kind of scratch. So there are companies that have made like Brewers yeast sachets that you can then use. Even the companies that make sorghum, so they mill it, they sell it milled in packets so that you can easily use it. So they also sell like a what they call a quick brew. So in there, I think they mix with some yeast nutrients and they add in yeast cultures and lactic acid, that they actually make it easier for people now that you can actually in your townhouse in the suburbs get a small pot and quickly mix up in a day. Everything's fermented without having to go the full traditional way. So things are slowly changing, and there are companies that are making these readily available.
Right.
I think that's speaking for our side.
It's so sorry, Jesse, you've been kind of out of the picture there for a while. Is that like I'm guessing, again, not fully knowing, but I'm guessing Rwanda's like a bit more rural than say, Nigeria. As a rule, like it doesn't have Lagos in there. So is it still much more traditional brewing there? Like you're the first craft brewery. So is it still very traditional brewing there? And do they follow the same? Is it the same thing that they just do what they've kind of learned without fully understanding why? Or
yeah, it's because I mean Rwanda, we have Kigali, that's a pretty dense capital city, but the rest of the country is very rural still and pretty densely and very uniform. Rwanda's I think right now the third most densely populated country on the continent. So we have about 500 people per square kilometer. And so it's really dense. There's a lot of people, but not like Lagos where, it's all in one place. So yeah, there's, people there is, as Bio mentioned, there's the women malt sorghum here. And so same thing, like he said, they steep it for a few days, it germinates, gets dried, and then gets milled and used in making sorghum beer. And we do have a bittering agent here. So Vernonia is used. It's called bitter leaf. And so Vernonia is actually used to add some bittering agent to the beer. And there's a couple of other plants that other people know that they're like, oh, my grandma used something, and so trying to kind of capture that with people and say, like, before that completely gets lost, how do we find out what was used and how it was used, and so that it can remain. And so a lot of the brewing, like when we do International Women's Day brews and such, for example, we try to get multiple generations of Rwandan women to come and brew together. And the younger woman being like, I know that there is ichigaji, I just have no idea how to make it. And then, getting kind of shown the process through women who, and at home, they'll brew kind of multi-generationally. So like the grandma might be making the yeast, because the yeast making process that I was mentioning takes about 4 days. And so, like you all were mentioning this, like usually the women kind of middle age are out, doing other jobs. So kind of the grandmas will be making the stuff that takes a long time at home, and then they'll all come together around making a brew the day of. So there's all different kind of approaches, and, but I would say ichigaji and the banana wine are the most commonly drunk things. And then we do have 2 big commercial, like industrial breweries here. So a Heineken and Skol. And that's what I think there's been some discussion about, like the kind of cultural thing, like the young kids are like, I want to be cool and I want to drink from like the Heineken bottle. And how do you start to find that balance in between? We brew beer using the traditional malted sorghum, but we then do a kind of, brewing process as you would with malted barley to come out with a clear sorghum-based beer. And when young Rwandans first take it, they take the glass and they sip, and they always kind of go, what are you giving me? Because this smells like my grandma's, and like you're about to trick me with a sour kind of beer. But then they look at it and they're like, but it doesn't look like my grandma's beer. And then when they take a sip and they're like, oh, it tastes different. And they were like, but now I have a little bit of nostalgia for like going to visit my grandma, but it tastes like something, different. And, how do we find more of this? So, how do you hybridize, at least in my situation, obviously I'm not Rwandan, so how do I make sure that I honor what is here that, we're helping to kind of talk about and, bring people around without using it, and without kind of devaluing it in that way. And so it's a fascinating process of kind of seeing how the traditional meets the modern as it changes, and as it, people are like, it's getting lost. What do we do about it? So how do you start to bring that back into everyday conversation around where those 2 things meet and come together to create new beers?
Yeah, I think that whole traditional thing, like I said, again, I'm going to just keep bringing it back to the only thing I know, which is kind of up around Lithuania, and that where they preserved all of this, but it's slowly doesn't have, it's losing some of the interest as well. But they're trying to do the same thing, that get back interest in it. But you do see, I think there's slowly a little bit of that coming back, at least up there, because if you look, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, say Lambics didn't, they were on their way out in Belgium, and now they're the trendiest beers in the world, like, and they're produced exactly the same way, it seems, so there would seem to be kind of hope that if you can, just bring that back, you can make it popular again. Actually, talking about sorghum there, because I have no clue, what does a sorghum beer actually taste like?
It tastes good.
You go. I haven't drank like a 100% sorghum beer before, so it's all been sorghum as adjunct for me. But yeah, Jesse, I think you know better about this.
I mean, well, we brew like the homemade, like you had mentioned with the ichigaji that's made at home. It's very opaque and very sour. And so I've made a 100% sorghum beer that that came out very sour, and it was interesting because people who really like sour beers were like, can you give me more of that? But other people said it was way too sour. And so we actually modified our mash to be able to, so if you mash at different temperatures and for different lengths of time, removes that sourness from the mash. And so now we make kind of, our most popular beer by far is a honey blonde ale that we make it with 80 to 90% sorghum. And it's, and when people sip it, like Rwandans who are very familiar with Ichigaje, they can detect it in the nose when they first smell it. But they're like, what's different? And then they can't, when they sip it, they're like, I can't taste it. It's, but I would say it's smoother, it's lighter. It's much lighter than barley. So that's the reason we add still 10 to 20% barley at this point in time. I'm hoping to kind of phase out, is more to get mouthfeel and body to the beer, because sorghum itself is very light. And we are working with Yakima Chief Hops on developing a hops profile that matches really well with sorghum. And so it has extra oils, it has different profiles to it to complement. So actually Apiwe was part of that original creation. And so it was great working with Yakima Chief, being like, this is what happens when you brew sorghum. How do we bring the body and things that people are really interested in to a traditional ingredient so that it's more of appeal to a wider audience. But overall, I'd say it's lighter. It's a little sweeter, and it can be sour. You can go all the way into fruited sours, depending on the mash technique that you use for it. So it's a really versatile grain, which is, I find, lovely. And by far our most popular beers are our sorghum-based beers over anything that we make, with barley or kind of following other European style beers.
Yeah. So actually,
I think sorry, Brian, from my side. So in South Africa specifically, we made up of different tribes. I think we are just over 9-10 different tribes. So what you find is that how it's made in one tribe is different from the next. So I'm the Xhosa. So in the Xhosa people, that we make it differently from, to say, the Zulu people. But then even within my own tribe, the Xhosa people, because we also have different preferences on food, on many different things, like how it's made, like by my family, would be different from, let's say, someone else in the same village, in the next village, in the same town. So it's the taste differs a lot. So interestingly, when the company, one of the big companies, Chibuku, had different plants in the country, and they were making the sorghum beer commercially. So one plant made it different to the next plant based on where it was located. So they find that people in a certain area preferred thicker, maybe in another area they preferred thinner, in one area they preferred slightly more sour than the next. So they actually, when they measure the titratable acidity, the levels of your TA levels would differ based on who your target market is in that area. And then you find some people prefer it fresh, so they would normally give it like a 5-day shelf life. So there's people that prefer it fresh from the brewery, and then there's people that prefer it like 3 days after it has left the brewery, and there's people that prefer it 5 days after, because they sell it as an active fermenting product. So you find that there's people that want it with the yeast in there, there's people that want it actively fermenting, and there's people that want it with all the yeast dead, and they want that mouthful that comes with the yeast. So it's a very and the dynamics in terms of the flavor profile is actually quite interesting. There's actually someone that I was working with, where we started to kind of put the profiles into like a BJCP style kind of guide, where you've got your aroma, appearance, flavor, and started putting together some tasting notes. But we realized that actually it's so open-ended that it makes it very difficult. Even like when I host, because I do have competitions where I get people to brew, and then we get to taste the products. So even then, the judges, the first question they ask you is like, okay, your name, and then you have to say your tribe, where you're from, and then also what were you trying to make, like what do you normally make it like, so that when the judges judge, they don't judge it as a blank and a blank. So they say, okay, fine, you are a brewer who prefers your beer to be more sour. So when they judge you, they don't compare you to someone who likes it less sour, because then that obviously is not playing level field, because it's not a fault. But what we look for when we do the judging is your sourness. Is it lactic acid sour, or is it acetic acid? Because the minute it's acetic acid, then obviously you've had a contamination. Then you've got more vinegar. It's and also your sour notes. Is it a smooth sour? Like similar with sour beer. Is it not a pungent sour that just kind of sticks at your tongue? Is it something that is easy drinking even within those sour notes? So it's a very interesting dynamic flavors.
Right. Sorry, I'm going to jump back because I should have probably checked on this before. As part of the process, let me just understand kind of traditionally, again, you're back into basically open fermentation with wild yeast. How was traditionally is the mash heated? Is it boiled? Is it raw? Is it unboiled?
So outside, we would do the fire outside in a big pot. And as my mother would tell you, you make sure you stir that thing. You don't want burn on. Things similar. We want to have a rolling boil. You don't want to burn on, because obviously then you start having your smoked burnt flavors, which obviously will translate to give you beer burnt. But it is so like you've got the souring. So for example, with the souring stage, depending on how sour you want it. So you might do leave it to sour for a day. Some people leave it to sour for 2 days. So determine, your final taste profile that you're looking for, and then you do the boiling and cool it down. Then some people still do like natural fermentation. So I've done both, where I just like let it in my 20 liter here in Johannesburg, let it ferment, and it does ferment. So I think even the sorghum malt, when they make it, because they don't, I've been to their plants, they're not as sterile environment. So I do think that even from, obviously I haven't done all the scientific work to find out how much yeast is in there, but I think they do allow yeast to be present, which helps. It just means if you allow it to naturally ferment, it might take a day longer, versus if you add a pack of yeast, or you have a starter culture that you prepare. Therefore, then obviously like normal clear beer, if you have yeast, depending on how much you have, your fermentation can either go faster or a bit slower.
Okay. Yeah, no, the reason I came up with it, I was asking, was because Jessie had mentioned this before. She mentioned there about a thin mouthfeel, and that, again, coming back to unboiled ones have a lot more protein. They have all the protein in them, which give them a high rich mouthfeel, and that's what they do up in, again, I'm bringing up Lithuania and some of the Nordic countries, and they do these raw ales. And so I was wondering if that's a tradition to not boil water, if it's always boiled. And the other reason I'm asking is as well is because some of the places in Lithuania that where they still do it traditionally, they used to, as I understand this now, is that in the past they wouldn't have had a lot of metal kettles, so they'd be trying to use hot stones to heat it up, and it mightn't actually reach boiling temperature. So I'm wondering, is that?
Oh yeah, we do. And I think the other reason why we boil also is because we use sorghum and millet, maize, which have a high gelatinization temperature compared to, let's say, barley. So as part of the process, we kind of have to boil. And interestingly, for me, I was told you boil for an hour. Even though, and it has to be an open, you must open the pot. So similar to clear beer, where you're driving your volatiles, you have to boil for the hour, because there's reactions that take place in there. So the same thinking, that you boil for an hour over the fire, but when they boil, like they worry about the type of wood that you use. So then obviously you must make sure that the wood that you're using will not introduce the smoked flavors onto the beer. So it's one of those things that, it's unwritten science that is written elsewhere. And once you understand both worlds, you're able to reason both worlds and say, oh, okay, this is why this is done this way, and this is why this is done this way. And for me, that makes it more interesting, because it's like, our grandmothers were so clever hundreds and thousands of years ago, that they found out before Louis Pasteur came into the picture and identified yeast. They knew that there was something happening, and if I don't clean, something else would happen, which I do not want. So for me, that's what fascinates me about the whole traditional African brewing.
Yeah, no, that's the same. Yeah, that's the same. It's like being a detective. You've seen the thing and you're trying to figure out why it happens that way. But it's that kind of change as traditions change that we mentioned. That, like I said, in some places they didn't have metal kettles, so they couldn't boil, so they'd heat rocks and they'd throw it in and boil, heat it up that way, or in some cases they throw it into the mash. And I'm wondering, as metal, it seems to be as metal became more common, then they basically boiled because they didn't know what else. It was the same thing, but they just kind of went the next stage. Sorry, we've Oba King here. I'm going to bring on a question which I think is interesting. Let me just see if I can bring up here. Oh, can you hear us?
Me.
Yeah, we're coming up here now.
So I wrote the question because I was nervous to talk. Thank you so much. So for me, is my question is that how do we get the young people to because of traditional brewing is part of our culture. So we are losing our cultures because now we're gonna have ceremonies. We have to buy like beer from companies, like no one is interested, and seems like the people with money to invest in education to educate the people on how to brew. They don't see this as our African roots are being eroded because of, yes, it's cool to study how to make a Western beer, but it seems like no one cares. And when the older people pass on, we have no one to do this for us. So how can we entice? How can we make the investors, the people with money, see this as very valuable? If anybody has an answer on that.
So I guess, Jesse, that's what you're doing with Kweza, isn't it? Trying to bring the kind of, make it a commercial, traditional brewery.
Yeah, we're doing kind of a hybrid of how do we tell the story of Rwandan traditional brewing in the vehicle of what the cool new beer is, right? So how do we have a clear beer that uses traditional methods, and we buy our sorghum malt from the rural mamas who are making the sorghum, and how do we create that combination, and also so through the product itself, how can there be a beer that is made with traditional ingredients, and that people are that meets kind of a more modern taste, as like the kids are kind of like, I want this, like how does it meet to create that bridge of an interest, and then hopefully through that, like what we imagine is at Kweza we'll have nights where there's Rwandan women who come in and like show how traditional brewing happens, so that bridge can happen, and that it happens in a place that we hope will create kind of a coolness factor of its new and cool, but also how do we use that as a vehicle to connect the grandmas with the youngest generation, and training through, but I think also probably Apiwe has a lot to say about this in your training institute, eh?
Yeah, no, I for me, similar to BC and the guys in Rwanda, it is something that's quite important to me also to make sure that we pass this on, we pass the knowledge on, and modernize it, and obviously times are changing. We can't hold on to the past, but how can we take the past, mix with the present, and make sure that in the future we exist in one form or another. It might not be the same way it was in the past, but how do we make sure that the traditional African beer making continues to be, and one day maybe we become the new Belgium, where people come to Africa to try our beers and travel the world just to come out try our beers. Unfortunately, I've read I know Nigeria and Ghana, most of the countries, government insists on people making use of local ingredients. I know that even the big companies are kind of forced by law to use some of the local grain. In South Africa, we do not have that. It's like, you use whatever you want to use. And maybe for me, those are some of the things that government can also help play a role to making sure that we continue using our traditional ingredients. And traditional beer is obviously seen, as I said earlier on, as something that's more rural. So even within the politicians, because now they are living it up in the cities and in their mansions, like they also don't see the need or the point of preserving these, unless obviously we have the traditional leaders who are on all fronts trying to preserve the African traditions. But it's something that is we're moving very, very slow. And I don't have the answers yet, but I'm doing the bits that I can.
Do you think that the market for this is mainly going to be locals, or it seemed like a big tourist, or do you think it'll be selling to tourists and they'll come first and they'll come for the beers, or will it end up with all the tourists and all the Europeans and Americans loving the beers and the locals, they're just not interested?
I think it's a bit of both. If you look at the beer world, and especially like Americans, obviously I haven't been there from the outside look. You guys have gone through the different beers. You've kind of gone full circle. The beers that were trendy back in the days, and then they got lost over years. Now you've gone back. Like if you look at, for example, lager as a style. In America 5-10 years ago, if you put a lager, you're like, are you crazy? Everyone is doing an IPA, everyone is but now what you're seeing now, lagers are back, and they're coming quite back because if you look at America, you guys have been through the whole their milkshake IPAs and all the other styles that personally I don't understand why you would do there. but what I'm finding is that we might be running out of ideas. And in Africa, we currently are having some great ideas of new styles, new ways of brewing, new ingredients that the world hasn't been exposed to yet. And I feel it is our time as Africans to say, let's stand up and get ourselves recognized as brewers on the global brewing stage. And people must know that we are here, we're making all these great beers using all these local ingredients. And that for me, I think will, like, there's people that travel to Germany to go try German beers, and it's part of their plans. They travel, they decide to do the whole US trip and go from state to state because they want to try different beers. I see that in the here, where people can fly to Nigeria, move down to Rwanda, up Nairobi, come down South Africa, or vice versa, or wherever, and just travel the African continent and learning about our tradition, learning about, and they can go to the villages. I think that's something that as Africa we still have. We have the authentic, as much as we've got the commercial side. You can go to any village in Africa today, you'll find a beautiful story. You get to see firsthand, all these great things. And I think that's something that we definitely have to offer as Africans. And we need to tell more of our stories. And I appreciate this platform. And hope, Brian, we'll see you in Africa soon.
Hope so.
Just know you can't walk from South Africa to Rwanda and reach out to Nigeria. It's like, hey, well, I've never been to Nigeria.
We'll be expecting you.
Yes, first I'm coming to Rwanda, then I'll hopefully get a track that's
No, but yeah, maybe that's a good point. We've had for an hour and 20 minutes now, so I think maybe that's a good point to finish, because tomorrow we will talk about, you know, where the commercial side of maybe more commercializing this, and where the place is for commercial craft breweries in Africa. And then obviously the influences, like you said, maybe they'll just become, those are the influences that seem to be starting to get traction in places like America. Maybe it requires that kind of external people to kind of validate for everybody what they actually have and make them value it. It's because that's always the thing, you know. Yeah, you don't kind of appreciate what you have until it's gone and someone else tells you what you had, and then you realize what it was, you know. So I don't know. It was a great session. Is there anything we should have covered there that we didn't, just about the traditional techniques or ingredients, or where it is in the culture that I didn't bring up or we didn't bring up? No.
Jesse mentioned the use of bitter leaf in Rwanda. I have to say I haven't seen anyone use it for the local beers here. But a small craft brewery just starting tried it once, and the beer was good. I tried myself; it was very terrible. So of course, must be getting something wrong. I hope to try it some other time. It's very good for bittering. It has antiseptic qualities as well. So maybe not so good for aroma, but good for the bacteriostatic stuff. Good for bittering. And maybe that's just good enough. But I definitely got it wrong with my trial, and I'll be trying it some other time, to see if Vernonia bitter leaf can be sort of a replacement for maybe just even bittering hops. You know, maybe not aroma hops, maybe just bittering hops.
Yeah, because a lot of those kind of, well, I suppose they're called gruits, that they're being referred to as gruits now, even though that's a very specific term. But that they're coming back into fashion as well, it seems. So they're
Interestingly,
one of the things that we sorry, go ahead, Apiwe.
Okay. No, I was going to say that interestingly, in South Africa, we've got a National Liquor Products Act, which is like a government regulation that defines beer. And in that, by law in South Africa, a traditional African beer should not be bittered. So we're not allowed to add hops. And then they state that it must be in its active state of fermentation. Then they also specify like you must have used sorghum or millet or any other traditional ingredients. And then to call it beer or clear beer, then you must have had added hops. For bittering, you must use at least 35% malted barley. So there's like there's certain definitions already in the country of what do you call traditional African beer and what do you call beer. I just wanted to add that.
Okay, so yeah, it sounds like it's biased against the traditional one.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jesse, you were going to say something there.
Oh, just so we are starting to look at how we can combine the knowledge that's here with, you know, both kind of day to day as the market kind of demands different things, and things like regulatory agencies. You know, Apiwe has been mentioning, you know, there's different countries with different regulations. So Rwanda is heavily regulated. So being able to make, like, you wouldn't legally be able to sell traditional homebrew ichigaje on the market because of the Rwandan government regulations. So where part of what we're doing to try to bridge this world is like, so we as Kweza, as a brewery, are working with different Rwandan researchers, traditional cultural institutes and academies, ecologists, different people throughout, and then the police forensics lab of the country, to be able to start to look at what are those properties of the yeasts, of the different, of bitter leaf, of, you know, that grass that people use to make banana leaf or banana wine. And so what properties are actually in those things, so that we can also have government permission to be bridging the traditional world and today's world. So whether it's in yeasts or in bittering, so that you can bridge the traditional world with current regulations, modern tastes, and create kind of a continuum rather than this is how it used to be, and this is now how it is. And so how can we work together to start to make that more of a continuum?
Right. Well, maybe we can talk about some of that tomorrow. So we'll see. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, because what is the actual commercial opportunity here? Because it seems like craft brewing in Africa as a whole is still quite small, still quite new, and it's dominated. Mainly commercial brewing is dominated, like you said, by the big boys. So yeah, there would seem to be a lot of opportunity, but I'm sure there's a lot of challenges to overcome. So maybe tomorrow we can discuss that. I'll just say thank you to everyone for taking part. Bayo, I don't think you're back tomorrow, though you're more than welcome if you've got an hour. But we will see Jesse and we'll see Apiwe, and we'll just be discussing, craft brewing as it is. What's the opportunities, what are the challenges, and where we go from there. So I'll just say thank you. We'll see you tomorrow, and I'm just going to play out another video just to kind of finish it all off. And so yeah, unless we missed something here. 1 second. No, we're just going to thank you here. So I thought we had a question. So yeah, we'll see you tomorrow, and thanks a million for your time. It was very enjoyable. It flew past.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, decided to stay on for a second to say I played the wrong video, but I apologize. Just to apologize. No, I'm just apologizing for having played the wrong video. So I won't bother trying.